Karl Marx, Political Writings. There are a couple different editions here, but the edition I read is one published by Penguin Classics. It's Karl Marx, Political Writings, Volume 3, The First International and After. I found this in the library one day and checked it out and just decided to read it. Like many other leftist wannabes, I've tried reading Marx before, but got scared off by the heavy philosophy. Communist Manifesto was required reading in one of my college history courses, but it was a struggle to get through. I didn't even try Das Kapital. But the Gifu Prefectural Library has a collection of Marx's political writings published by Penguin Classics. These are a lot different and easier to read than Marx's philosophical writings, depending, I suppose, on how your brain is wired. My brain has a hard time digesting philosophy, but the political and historical readings are very interesting and pretty easy to read as well. I'm really having a hard time putting it down once I get into it. It's interesting to see a different side of Marx than the philosophical side we are so used to hearing about. In the political writings, Marx kind of emerges as the Noam Chomsky of his day. Now, contrary to what most people believe, Karl Marx actually wasn't the first socialist. He didn't invent socialism or communism. He was just the best writer of his day who was advocating socialism and communism, and that's why we kind of associate him as the founder of this. Perhaps like Chomsky is one of the best writers of his day. So in this volume, The First International and After, Volume 3 of Marx's Political Writings, I've been concentrating on Marx's writings on the Franco-Prussian War and the Civil War in France. And again, they strike me as extremely similar to Chomsky's writings. Aside from the fact that Marx is now history, and Chomsky is still writing about current events, aside from that, they could almost be interchangeable. Just like Chomsky does, Marx has an ability to cut very cleanly through the hypocrisy and expose the ridiculousness of whatever position he is arguing against. Whether he is arguing against the Second Empire in France or the annexation of Alsace-Lorraine by Germany. And I know nowadays everyone likes to talk about all the things Marx got wrong, how the revolution didn't happen the way Marx said it would. But for everything he got wrong, there is one passage when he's writing about the Franco-Prussian War when he predicts World War I with shocking accuracy, way back in 1870. I'll read the quotation. He said, "Whoever is not completely deafened by the clamor of the moment, or does not have an interest in deafening the German people, must realize that the War of 1870 is just as necessarily pregnant with a war between Germany and Russia as the War of 1866 was with the War of 1870. I say unavoidably, except in the unlikely event of a prior outbreak of revolution in Russia. If this unlikely event does not occur, then a war between Germany and Russia must be considered a fait accompli. If Alsace and Lorraine are taken, then France will later make war on Germany in conjunction with Russia. It is unnecessary to go into the unholy consequences." So how's that, huh? He predicted that there would be another war between France and Germany. He predicted that Russia would join on the side of France. And he even mentioned the possibility that there could be a revolution in Russia at about this time as the war with Germany. And he knew what a horrible bloodbath this war would be, right? He said it is unnecessary to go into the unholy consequences of how terrible this war is going to be. Yeah, amazing. And then also, like I was saying before, he just really does a good job of eviscerating other people's arguments. And again, to illustrate that, I'm going to read another extended quotation. Now, this is a quotation from his writings on the Franco-Prussian War. After the war, Prussia, or Germany, is claiming Alsace and Lorraine from France. They used to be French territories, now they're going to become German territories. Marx is arguing that this is a terrible idea. Now, he knows all the kind of arguments that the German diplomats have put forward on the international stage to say why they should have Alsace and Lorraine. So he goes through and he kind of addresses these arguments one by one and says why they're just ridiculous. And I won't read the whole thing, but an extended quotation when he's rebutting the arguments about Alsace and Lorraine. Excuse me. Okay. They meaning the Germans, they dare not pretend that the people of Alsace and Lorraine pant for the German embrace. Quite the contrary. To punish their French patriotism, Strasbourg, a town with an independent citadel commanding it, has for 6 days been wantonly and fiendishly bombarded by German explosive shell, setting it on fire and killing great numbers of its defenseless inhabitants. Yet the soil of those provinces, once upon a time, belonged to the Wilhelm German Empire. Hence, it seems, the soil and the human beings grown on it must be confiscated as imprescriptibly German property. But if the map of Europe is to be remade in the antiquary's vein, let us by no means forget that the Elector of Brandenburg, for his Prussian dominions, was the vassal of the Polish Republic. The more knowing patriots, however, require Alsace and the German-speaking part of Lorraine as a material guarantee against French aggression. But, in good faith, is it not altogether an absurdity and an anachronism to make military considerations the principle by which the boundaries of nations are to be fixed? If this rule were to prevail, Austria would still be entitled to Venetia, and the line of the Minico and France to the line of the Rhine in order to protect Paris, which lies certainly more open to an attack from the northeast than Berlin does from the southwest. If limits are to be fixed by military interests, there will be no ends to claims, because every military line is necessarily faulty and may be improved by annexing some more outlying territory. And moreover, they can never be fixed finally and fairly, because they always must be imposed by the conqueror upon the conquered, and consequently carry within them the seeds of fresh wars. History will measure its retribution not by the extent of the square miles conquered from France, but by the intensity of the crime of reviving, in the second half of the 19th century, the policy of conquest. But, say the mouthpieces of Teutonic patriotism, you must not confound Germans with Frenchmen. What we want is not glory, but safety. The Germans are an essentially peaceful people. In their sober guardianship, conquest itself changes from a condition of future war into a pledge of perpetual peace. Of course, it is not Germans that invaded France in 1792 for the sublime purpose of bayoneting the revolution of the 18th century. It is not Germans that befouled their hands by the subjugation of Italy, the oppression of Hungary, and the dismemberment of Poland. Their present military system, which divides the whole adult male population into two parts, one standing army on service and another standing army on furlough, both equally bound in passive obedience to rulers by divine right, such a military system is, of course, a material guarantee for keeping the peace and the ultimate goal of civilizing tendencies. In Germany, as everywhere else, the sycophants of the powers that be poison the popular mind by the incense of mendacious self-praise. Okay, end quote. It actually goes on like that for several more pages, but I think that's enough to get the point across. So after reading this, kind of several thoughts spring to mind. Number one is, interestingly, Marx was very involved in the politics of his day. He wasn't just sitting around waiting for the revolution and saying, we don't care about these bourgeois politics, we're just waiting for the communist revolution. He had opinions on contemporary events, international politics, the balance of power in Europe, the boundaries between France and Prussia. Second point is, this is a lot different than the philosophical Marx that most of us are used to. The philosophical Marx who goes on about abstract concepts. He talks about confusing things like the relationship of capital to workers. Here he is talking about very concrete, easy to understand, simple political concept. And he's sounding very reasonable and clear-headed doing it. And thirdly, what's more, he completely demolishes the other side here, doesn't he? I mean, it's hard to imagine anyone still being able to argue that Germany should be given the Alsace-Lorraine after reading this. Now, I don't necessarily consider myself a Marxist, and in fact, in the kind of anarchist-communist split in the First International, I traditionally put myself on the anarchist side of that and agree with the anarchist criticism of Marx's philosophy of the dictatorship of the proletariat. And I think that the dictatorship of the proletariat led to some of the horrors in the Soviet Union. But man, did Marx ever set Bismarck straight in that essay. I mean, Marx just eviscerated all of Bismarck's arguments. Marx was always being asked to draft this or that resolution by this or that committee throughout his life. And after reading his writings, it's very easy to see why. He could argue very clearly and very convincingly. Just like we usually think to ourselves nowadays, I wonder what Noam Chomsky has to say on this topic or that topic. So the 19th century radicals must have been eagerly awaiting Marx's word on new political developments. Now, the other interesting thing here is Marx himself is from Germany. So when he's arguing that it's ridiculous that the Germans call themselves a peaceful nation, and it's ridiculous that the Germans have any claim to Alsace and Lorraine, he's arguing against his own country, or his own native lands, actually. So maybe that's another comparison with Chomsky. Chomsky is often arguing against his own native land as well. And both Marx and Chomsky are also secular Jews, although that's probably neither here nor there, but it's, another little thing. My main point in bringing up all this stuff is simply this. As Noam Chomsky gets older and older, I hear a lot of people worry about what will happen to the movement after Chomsky is gone. But it strikes me that every age has had a Noam Chomsky of some sort. Karl Marx was the Noam Chomsky of the 19th century. In the 21st century, there will be somebody else to fill Chomsky's shoes after he is gone. Also, in the same book, I didn't talk about it. I've been talking about the Franco-Prussian War. But also in the same volume, Marx's Political Writings, Volume 3, You can read The Civil War in France, and that is also excellent reading for all the same reasons. It's Marx kind of on top form, writing kind of a very polemical take on what's going on and just eviscerating all the other arguments on the other side. Recommend it.